Welcome, welcome to the Crochet Show with your host, Nikki. I am so excited to be here, and we're going to talk about crochet symbol charts. Something a lot of people have been asking for, and is such an amazing topic, and we're going to dig deep and we're going to talk about all the details about it, including a practice pattern that I'll show you that you can literally do right now if you wish to do so. Number one is, what are crochet symbol charts? Well, I have some here, so I'm going to tell you first a little bit about it, and then we're going to go into the details, okay? So let's talk about, what is a crochet symbol chart? It's a visual representation of a written pattern. So it's an easy way to see which stitch is where. It's a 2D representation of the pattern. Obviously not 3D, but 2D. And each stitch has a specific symbol that is being represented on the chart. Okay, so it is done stitch by stitch. It shows the different rows, and you can even see different colors if the chart is colored. And it gives specific numbers for each color. So the cool thing on crochet symbol charts is that they are not language based, which means that you can use them in different countries. And you don't have the barrier of the language preventing you from being able to crochet a certain pattern, which is kind of cool, right? It is a lot of work for a designer to put that together, which is why not a lot of people do it. But it is something that's out there, which is actually really interesting. And there's many tools for you to be able to not only understand them, but also to create your own. Now, this video is all for you to talk about all the little details, right? So the crochet symbols were actually made US based. So there are UK terms, right, that you can think about, and you can see if there is UK based symbols. But most of the time, almost 100% of the time, if you see a crochet symbol chart, it is based on US terms. So it's just something to keep in mind, okay? So now let's hop right into number 2 and start reading crochet symbols, because these crochet symbols that I'm talking about first are the basic ones. The first one, and I'm just going to talk all the way up to this line, okay? So ignore all the rest right now. We're just going to start with the details. The very first, and this is why I'm going to put my hand here, right? So that you can only focus on the most important parts. And I know there's a little shadow, so I apologize. By the way, I grabbed this from yarnstandards.com, which is the Craft Yarn Council. So if you want to grab this, you can grab it from there, or you're going to hop into to my website and you can grab it from there as well. Okay, so we have it here that you can see the chain is always made into a loop. Sometimes it's oval, sometimes it's a circle, right? So most of the time it's an oval though, and that just means a chain. Makes sense. It's just like a little loop. So think of it as a loop, right? A slip stitch is made with a little dot, which is kind of hard to see sometimes that there's a dot. So just keep that in mind. And then the single crochet is an X. Okay. So now here's the cool thing. And this is what I really love about these symbols is if you look at just this, okay, I should have had something to cover things up. Let's see if I can use this, because I'm trying not to distract you. Okay, so if you're just looking at this and you look at these right here, these are representing stitches, right? Obviously, we have the half double crochet, treble crochet, and double triple. Now, a lot of times people have asked me, how do you remember which one? You know, sometimes people mix it up and say, oh, this is the double crochet. And I said, well, there's an easy way to remember, and this is actually how these stitches came about. So a stitch is pretty much, it's a tall, right? And it has a line on top. The line on top is similar to finishing a stitch. But these lines right here, these cross lines actually tell you how many times you're yarning over. Now, the only problem is that for half double crochet, you're technically yarning over as well, but it is not the part where you do a yarn over again, right? Where you do that extra step for the double crochet. So you can tell by these lines how many times you need to yarn over. You just have to remember that the half double crochet doesn't have the line, because even though you're yarning over, you're not doing that extra step to get to the height of a double crochet, right? So this is an easy way to remember which stitch is which. So let's start over, right? So chain, slip stitch, single crochet, half double, double, treble, and double treble. If you just get the basics, you will be able to read most of the patterns, right? This is literally the basics. Don't even go beyond, just learn this. We're going to do a practice in a second, okay? So once you get the basics, then you can kind of go a little bit beyond. When I say beyond, I'm talking the advanced stitches to really understand. Now that you know the basics, you want to go a little deeper, right? So deeper meaning you want to now understand the rest of them. But you can't understand them unless you know the basics, because all these advanced stitches are based on the basics. Just like learning crochet, right? You learn the basic crochet stitches first before you go into stitch patterns or patterns, and then really explore everything possible and challenge yourself and get out of your comfort zone, right? So for example, here you can see that these are two X's together, right? So think of an elongated X. So we have two X's that are coming together, which means that you're doing a decrease, right? Single crochets, two single crochets together, you're making a decrease, right? Here it would be 3 single crochets together. It's 3 X's coming together at one point. The top is always the end of the stitch, right? When you're finishing a stitch. And then here you have double crochets coming together, right? So you can see that there's the line on top. You always have just one line because you're ending up with one stitch. The line on top tells you how many you're ending up with, right? So you end up with one stitch, but you started with 2 that were double crochet, okay? So over here, this will be obviously 3. Now here you can tell that you're coming together from one stitch and you're ending up with one stitch, therefore a cluster. This happened to be double crochet, half double, double, right? You can see they're coming all from the beginning, from one stitch, you adding a bunch of stitches in, but you don't finish them up until the end, because you're not ending up with, in this case here, 3 double crochets. You're ending up with still one stitch at the end in the same stitch, but you added a bunch of stitches and you still combined them. So you started with one stitch and you ended up with one stitch, but you added a bunch in the middle, right? That means that you did the half finished double crochets and then you're finishing it up, right? You guys all know that, right? And then for this one, it would be the shell. You're starting with one stitch right here and you end up with 5. You can see that there's 5 lines over there on top, therefore you're ending up with 5. Here you can see it's chain 3 picot or picot or however you're going to pronounce this, right? So you can tell how to make it. So you have chains and you have the slip stitch. Now here's a cool little thing. You're going to have this guy right here, which means you're going around a post and it's telling you which way to go. You have a front post and you have a back post. You have to kind of just remember that. Okay, that's one of those things that you just simply have to remember. Which way is which? So you can say maybe, the front way is, I don't know how you want to remember, but one is the front and one is the back, right? You can kind of, not really, paste it on this, which is what is the back loop, what is the front loop, right? This is actually a little bit easier. So we have front loop. If you take the V, right? If you have a V of a stitch, so pretend this is a V of a stitch, this is the top view down of a stitch, right? You would have here the front loop and then you have here the back loop, right? So I don't know if you want to remember it from this way. So we have the front loop, right, kind of shown here, and then the back loop, you have this more visual. I don't know how you will want to remember it, right? One is the front, one is the back for the post stitches, right? But the idea is that you're going around and it's showing you that you're kind of going around the stitches, right? So that's something to think about. These symbols, you will get a hang of it. Just like reading a pattern you're not born with it. You have to learn it. It's like riding a bicycle. It's like learning how to crochet, learning how to read a pattern, and then learning how to read the symbols. Some people say, oh, I learned how to crochet, but I can't read a pattern. It's just the next step, right? The same thing with symbols. It's just the next step. So it's just a way you have to determine, are you ready to learn this? And are you ready to use it more and more often so that way you can remember it? Because it's simply practice. Practice will make you remember, right? So once you do, you're good to go. So now let's hop into the next part, which is practicing a actual crochet pattern chart. So I have one for you. So this is actually a heart. So let me make it like this so you can remember it is a heart. I should have written that down. So now you would start right here. So I will give you a little bit more tips in a second, right? But let's just go into the symbols. So right here you would have 3 chains. This one right here is a magic ring. You could also do it as a chain of 4 and then going into the first chain that you made, or you make this into a magic ring. That is your choice, right? Either one works in this case, as long as you pull it tight in the end, or you sew it in a way that it's tight. Either way is fine. But let's say it's chain of 4, right? And then you place, this is, do you remember? Treble crochets, because you yarn over twice. So you have 1, 2, 3 treble crochets all going into that stitch. And then here we have double crochets all going into that same stitch. Then we have a chain, a treble crochet, a chain, and then this entire thing is backwards over here. You end up with adding 3 more chains over here and then slip stitching back to the loop to connect it, and then it creates a heart shape. So you can totally practice this right now. Now that you know each stitch, you can practice this, which is really fun. I actually have this heart pattern on my website. If you actually need a video with it, that's totally fine. You can check it out. But this is one pattern using all these symbols to represent a written pattern, which I just verbally said out loud so that you can remember it, hopefully. But it's really cool. Like, it's all about practicing, right? So the next thing is all about tips, because you got to know all the little details that you got to think about, right? So let's talk about the tips that some people may not remember when it comes to crochet symbols. So one of the tips I want to tell you about is lefties versus righties. Most crochet symbol charts are made for righties, unfortunately, but it's true because we just have more righties, so most people base it on that. Now, does that mean that the lefties are in disadvantage? Actually, no. All they have to do is do a mirror image of it and then just go from there, right? So the thing is, you don't actually per se have to, though, because as you can see on this one, I'm going to hold it up for a second, right? You can see that I put the slip stitch over there. I could easily move the slip stitch over here and be good to go. And it's literally the reversed version. So if you simply go the other way around and you just remember where that slip stitch goes, you should be okay. You can literally reverse the entire thing. Either you are using a program to flip it around and make a mirror image, or you simply, draw it on the paper. Speaking of drawing on the paper, it's ideal if you want to go and do a practice on it or generally use a chart, you want to be able to draw things. And I'm not just talking drawing things, but taking notes, like, where am I? Make yourself a little something, like maybe cross out the stitches you did. Use a highlighter. I did this stitch. I did this stitch. Just so that you remember where you are. It's ideal. Or you can use a sticky note or something so you remember where you are. You can blend out the rest. Whatever feels comfortable for you. You can even put it into some kind of foil or something that you can look through and you can draw over. Think of like dry erasers or something like that. It's totally up to you, but it's ideal that you mark yourself. this is where I am right now, or this is what I just finished in some kind of way. And as I said earlier, some charts have colors. So for example, if you're supposed to change colors every row, let's say it's stripe in some kind of way, you have to remember that too. It's important to look at the notes or the pattern key, right? You want to reference, is this done because they just want to show me that this is the new row? Because some colors on a chart are just there to help you to know which row you're on or round you're on. But sometimes they actually reference the color that was used. So you want to check the notes or the pattern key to make sure that you're not mixing things up or assuming things that are not there. So that's a very, very important thing. The other thing I want to remind you of is the difference between a chart, a graph, and a diagram. Because some people use them interchangeably, which, you know, sometimes happens to me too by accident. But what I just showed you was a chart. A graph is typically done with these little square little things, right? Some people just say pixel graph, that way they remember, right? They're all little squares, and you see them typically for tapestry, for corner to corner, for GraphGAN, stuff like that. You see it into little pixels, right? And they all are color coded, right? So that's a graph. And a diagram is typically to show you, for example, think of clothing, like garments, and it shows you where, like the measurements of the garment, like this is how, you know, the length of the arm or the front panel, the back panel, etc., etc. So that's the difference between a chart, a graph, and a diagram. So just something to keep in mind, right? And another thing that I always say is practice. And I've said it earlier. It's very important to practice. This is something that, you know, some people learn faster than others. And that's totally okay. All it matters is that you keep going, and until you feel comfortable, that you don't even need a little, you know, chart on the side for yourself. Like, let's call it a key chart, right? So that you reference it. I do still do that. If I haven't used a chart in a while, I literally have a key next to me so I can reference which one is which. So that way I don't get confused. And it's typically the ones that I mix up is half double, double, and treble. For some reason I mix them up, and that's okay, right? But if you remember that the half double simply doesn't have that line across the T, and starting with the double crochet, you will see it, how many times you yarn over. That is an easy way to remember which one is which. You can hop over to my website. You can learn how to change colors in crochet, which uses pixel graphs, or you simply read some of my patterns. My patterns are very well written. Most of my patterns, not all, but most of patterns have also a video tutorial with it. And if you need even more help or to simply support and encouragement and challenge yourself and get out of your comfort zone, then my membership is for you. So I hope to see you next time around with a new subject. Every week we have something else to talk about and exploring crochet. And if you want to learn more, it's time to explore more. So I hope to see you then. Until then.